Hello from Prairie Edge. Today we are with Dr. Zimiga again, and we are going to be talking about the Indian card. Who gets to be Native in America? By Carrie, Lowry. I am scared to say that last name in case I mess it up. But I found this book very interesting. I found it very relatable in my own life. And we have some questions here for Dr. Zimiga, since he had read the book also. And first off, what do you have to say about this? What did you find in this book?
Well, first of all, Haom Yapi. It's good to talk to you again. And looking at this book and what the writer is saying and the message that she's sending, it comes, as Anita was saying, from her experience in their journey within this life. So I found this book has a lot of good information inside of it. It talks historically about all the ways that people try to identify other people. And then in the name, the Indian card is a misnomer. And because that misnomer it looks at tribal enrollment. We need to drop the word tribal. We need to include the word nations, tribal nations, like the Lakota Nation, or you look at other nations, because they're the ones that create the identity. And in searching out this identity, it seems that we have to revere back to a whole process of why do we have to look at it as assimilation, to assimilate into something else, which is a theory, and all theories are not true. So when you say that, how do you look at that when you meet people that are different? And that is a process of acculturation. Culture is the word. That is the key word. So that's the way, Anita, I looked at it and saying, why would this writer take this time in looking at, this issue, because it pertained not only to her, but to a nation of people, like the Dene people, or the Anishinaabe people.
Yes. So for people who aren't familiar, what is blood quantum? And who determines that?
Well, how many quarts of blood do you have?
Yeah, exactly. About 8 or 9.
Yeah. So if you had a hat on, you wore it in the sun all the time, and your face was in the sunlight, but you took your hat off, you'd be probably white from on top. So you're about a quart low right there. So it was a way. In passing, said, how do we work with these indigenous nations? Because we've made an agreement with them. And that agreement says, we're going to provide this, 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 and this. It was really that kind of saying, for what we're going to take on this side, we're going to limit your land usage. We're going to limit the circular thought and analogies that you use to identify as a nation. So it was because then they had to pay. So payment is the thing. So anybody who really would determine, that's the federal government. That was the people coming and saying, well, we just can't take their land because the international law says you cannot just go in there without providing, some type of restitution to the people, because that's stealing. And no nation had that right because of the treaty agreement. But when they wrote that, so when you came up, they said, and then they had amalgamation. France, Germany, all those nations, England, they would say, if you marry an indigenous person, if you marry an Indian lady, or you marry an Indian man, it's their language, Indian, you won't have to pay tax. That's amalgamation. And so you see a lot of resource that you would see a lot of at the economics of fur traders. They didn't want to pay. They're out there trapping all these furs and doing their things. And so that's who's, but the tribal nations said, no, this is our members. We determine who are members. As a Lakota nation, to become a tribal member, there was 4 ways. One was by marriage. Second one was by hunka, making relatives with a pipe. The third one was by knowing or understanding the ceremonies. And the fourth one is, if you look at it from that perspective, the fourth one had to do as an acceptance. An acceptance that we're all 2-legged. We all have 4 limbs. We all have 7 holes in our head. And you're part of the creation, the circular. And they wanted to, the European thought is linear. So that linear thought is what created
Blood quantum.
blood quantum.
And then kind of back into that, and the U.S. government, she did mention in here the 1-drop rule for blacks, and she implied, and it was considered 1-drop rule for blacks so they could be labor. The less of the native indigenous, it's easier to get their land.
Well, it was easier to take somebody's land.
Yeah.
It was easier to take the land
Because
you belong to some kind of church organization. And so you look at that, people came here looking for freedom. They were looking for away from a repulsive to them of government. So the thing is that when they created this whole process, it was for their advantage, is because then they could, the African people had their own language when they came here. And they themselves were were taken from someplace else to the United States. So, you know, it was that process. But Native nations accepted people of who they were.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were a black person, Lakota words is that they call it hasapa. But this is ha, skin, sapa. If you say haska, that means white skin. So if you looked at that from that, but all it talks about is what your skin is. It had nothing to do with race.
Are you sure? I'm gonna argue
Sure.
here a little bit because what I'm getting from that, the one black rule is that they could make you be a slave or an indentured servant or a
Sure.
sharecropper
They owned you.
because of that one drop rule. They, as the government, want coveting native lands. The less they could make you, the more they could take your land.
Yeah, it's their process.
Yes.
So it's a process that is established with a written law.
Yes.
So the people that were writing the laws, they knew how to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other people that were involved on the other side that were being used, they had no rights. They couldn't vote.
No.
They couldn't own land. And that was the whole thing within America. There was times when the Irish in this country couldn't own land is because when they came across, or the Italians, is because of the white Anglo-Saxons wanted to control that. And so they, when I say they, the white Anglo-Saxon created a ladder of success. If you learn what we do and tell you, then you will climb this ladder. But it seems funny that indigenous nations still, they use their resources, but still at the same time, many of them have the poorest existence. So there's also economic slavery. It's not the color of a person's skin. It's not the, everybody in America came from humble beginnings, but equal opportunity. And so, but education, the education that came is because people needed people to understand what they wanted to have done. But the word, they learned more than that. So this book itself has a lot of good questions, and I think those are what you pointed out is a major part of what issues are happening today.
Exactly. What do you think? Why do you think there's such a stigma when it comes to blood quantum?
One of the things is that
There's so much lateral discrimination, where full bloods look down on.
well, we learn racism.
Yes, we do.
That's part of anything is that anybody starts to discriminate, you look at it saying, well, I'm better than you are, is because, I have more money than you. Or I'm better than you are because I come from a more sophisticated society. Or I can do this is because of who my associates are. So it's all this, still comes back to that whole point of view that we learn it from our parents, and we learn it in schools, and pretty soon it becomes dominant. A dominant mindset. And that's why all America and all Americans, they themselves are really very different than any other nation. They are an enigma to this whole world. Mm-hmm. And we need to realize who feeds us, who clothes us, what workers do this, who out there makes that bread every day for us, whose hands. And those are the things, is the guy that owns the bread shop, he wants to have customers come in. He wants these kind of things. So when he does this, what does he do? He has to train people that are going to be reasonable to make a good product so that he can succeed. In every generation, you have people, or even today, they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and they do that run every day, but they're keeping this all together so we can maintain this lifestyle that we lead today. But you have to have inclusiveness.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the end of our time, and I want to thank you again, Dr. Zimiga, for coming in and visiting with us, and we'll do it again next month. And we're going to start with this, we're going to do this book right here, The History They Tell. There's some new history about the battle at Greasy Grass, considered the last stand, but there's lots of new information, and there was a lot more people at that battle than we really know. And again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.